here. Okay, so are we good then with the direction and the project and thought processes about the article pieces, and then on the last 21st and probably the 28th, we will go through the rest of those articles, most on the 21st, but then on the 28th, we will kind of put some stray ends, odds and ends, and I still intend to put up a few videos. I just have not gotten to those yet. So, but I will encourage all the one-on-ones that you think are needed. It's just up to you to give me a yell. Okay.
Holy cow, class ends on the 28th. That's the last day of classes.
That's pretty much it. It has flown by. And then 3 weeks later, we start summer session. And I have 3 10-week graduate classes during summer session. So one of those is pure statistics. Okay. Well, hopefully you can think back and refresh yourself on the LR Learning Resources article. Let me pull that one up and share that so we'll have something to kind of talk through just a little bit. Let's see what I do with that thing. Yeah, that's it. Okay. Okay. Let me see if I can push it. This is an article that was, as I mentioned, was done a few years back. It's about 15 years old, but it is one of those pieces that still seems to be a seminal piece within that particular field in terms of dealing with students that are identified at the collegiate level as having a undiagnosed learning disability. And you have to understand that most of these kids, if they had been diagnosed with a learning disability, it was very early in their academic career and they had not received services for quite a long period of time. And so as we kind of envisioned this thing, we didn't use the language in here, but as we kind of envisioned this thing, as we developed the grant proposal back in, I guess, about 2000 or so, it was kids that would be known in kind of the everyday common sense vernacular as LD gifted kids, because they were able to get into a very competitive university and do very well, did very well in high school, and most of them were in the top 10, maybe 15% of their class in high school in terms of GPA. And so these were kids that had some issues, some learning disability issues or developmental disability issues, but they had managed, because they were just fairly bright kids, to get their A's and get their keep their GPA up and do all those things. They just had to work their butts off. But a lot of it was because they were aware of a lot of things and very studious. Well, when you get to a very competitive university, then it's kind of like you become you go from being, a big fish in a little pond into being a, kind of a minnow in a much bigger pond. And so what happened with these kids is that they found they were not able, not able to really deal with the kind of the academic rigor and the academic requirements of the situation in which they found themselves. And we had kind of identified this in some of the literature and some of the things that you read about those things. And so we applied for a grant. We got a 3-year grant. We actually ran it into the 4th year with unspent funds. And the basic notion of the grant was to test and identify kids that were having academic difficulties at the university level that was inconsistent with their previous testing and previous performance. And so, we had the counseling center referred them to us, and we had some kids that self-referred and things like that. But we had a program in which we wanted to talk with these kids and set them up with tutors that then could help them figure out what kinds of services and what kinds of approaches they needed in order to be successful in an academic environment. And that's where the the title of the article, this is what I think is a pretty good title for the article, because it should tell you the basic premise of the research. It should also tell you a little bit about the setting, and it should tell you, sort of the context from which that the research is found in. And so it was an individualized, every student that we worked with had an individualized program. They all had tutors. The tutors were master's level special ed students. And these master's level special ed students met with these university students to help them learn these specific strategies. And then the students would, kind of use these strategies and try to, improve their academic performance. And so we had a pretty good model there that we thought, and the literature said that this was something that we were beginning to see, and we expressed that right off the top in kind of the first sentence of the article, in which we talked about learning disabilities and ADHD students enrolled in post-secondary ed, that it's a well-documented phenomenon that they have some difficulty. And that about 6% of those students coming into 4-year institutions were actually learning disabilities or had other ADHD issues or things like that, cognition issues or whatever, that we needed to work with. And we just wanted to know, was there a model that we could use that would help these kids be successful? And the model that we tried or implemented was kids with tutors that were master's level special ed majors, and individualized strategies that these students can use. And in the article, you'll see a little bit later, there's a table of all the different strategies that we looked at, that we had available, and that the tutors had been trained to help implement. And so we ran this for 3 years. We collected the obvious data, GPA, pre and post during semesters and things like that. GPA during the semester, they were receiving treatment. Some kids were in the program for 1 year. Some kids were in the program for 2 years. Some kids were in the program for 3 years. And so it was just a handful, but we had, 3 years worth of data. And then we had a survey that we had developed that we used with those students and used with the peer tutors, with the college tutors, so that we could, attempt to get their perceptions of what worked and what didn't work. And we were encouraging students to use these strategies in other classes and in other settings, and not just in the framework of this particular project. And so we had it set up in that way. Do you have any questions about that particular the background on this and how we kind of worked with this thing? Yeah, we were looking at retention. That was a key thing, was retention. And because we did not find much literature on that. We found some literature about working with kids with learning disabilities, but we didn't find much in the collegiate setting, but we didn't find much literature on retention at that time. Now there's a whole lot more now. But so we wanted to look at retention, but we didn't really have a totally good model for that. And so we included some of that information in here, and we collected some data on that, but that was not a key thing. And so we ended up with characteristics that we thought should identify these models. And we did a kind of an informal assessment on students' individual learning needs, much less structured assessment than what you would find in the public schools or PK-12, but enough of an assessment to identify particular broad areas of learning disabilities. And so we didn't have the psychologist interviews and things like that you would find in PK-12, but we did have quite a lot of the testing available to work with. And we realized it had to be individualized, so we had to select learning strategies that met the unique needs of each student. We had to teach learning strategies using systematic explicit instructions. And so what we did was, we identified a particular course a student takes, math, science, literature, whatever the course was, and we focused on one course. We focused on implementing those strategies in one course, with the idea that the students would be encouraged to incorporate it over into the other courses too. And some did, some didn't. But we wanted to see if they could carry over some of the stuff they were picking up from their tutor in a particular course, focused at a particular course, and whether they could carry it over into sort of a broader look at things. And then we wanted to evaluate the individualized strategy using both the quantitative and qualitative methodologies. And so we wanted it to be mixed methodology because we wanted to be able to identify changes in GPAs, changes in differences between different tutors that may have felt that some students were being more serious as opposed to others, things like that. But we also wanted to get student perceptions and get rather deeply into student perceptions. And so at the end of the project, one of the more meaningful pieces of it was a series of interviews by one of the other researchers, Esther Minskoff, who was one of the, godmothers of special ed from years ago. She was on the original task force in there in the mid-late 60s to develop the special ed model. And so she was, she was kind of one of the grand old dames of special ed, but she was also a really high-powered qualitative researcher. And so she did interviews with students and mentors and tutors at the end of the project. And so I was doing the quantitative pieces and she was doing the qualitative pieces. And our third researcher was kind of trying to pull all of it together in terms of writing styles and all that sort of stuff. As I said, there's a lot of information in here. We had, a list of the strategies, so we could identify which strategies were, different students being asked to deal with, and we had specific instructional packets on each one of these strategies for the tutors. From the literature, one thing you do not find in articles typically is the complete lit review. You'll find, kind of the excerpted, is that right? Is that a word? Excerpted? I don't know. Review of literature that hits at the high point. And typically you will find a summary section that really lays out the conceptual framework element. And so this last paragraph down here at the bottom of this page, this is really where we kind of talk about, what is the framework that we're around which the questions we're trying to answer. And and it was basically the current literature supported the need to evaluate the effectiveness of specific strategy training, although there wasn't much literature about it. There was more literature at secondary level, but not much literature at the post-secondary level. And so we understand that developmentally, students at post-secondary level would be at a different developmental stage than students, anywhere in the PK-12 spectrum, typically. And so we needed to see where these strategies actually were effective with students at a different developmental level and with different academic demands on them. And so, that was kind of the gap. Very often you'll find in research, when you start doing literature, you'll find a gap in what you want to do, the conjecture you're making, the hypothesis you're offering, and what the literature says has been done. And so in this case, we wanted to fill that gap. We wanted to see whether this methodology that was so effective at the PK-12 level actually would be effective at the post-secondary level. And that's why this was funded as a demonstration project. There was some previous research done, mostly limited, but small scale, but we wanted to run it as a full program at a university to see how it worked in a 3-year model. And that was the idea of the thing. You have questions about, I know you've heard this term, you have questions about what's called a conceptual framework or a theoretical model or a theoretical background? Well, you need to think about developing questions there, because if you're headed in the direction of the dissertation stage, you will need to think about what is a conceptual framework, what is your conceptual framework, around which is your research to be based. And sometimes it's other people's research, sometimes it's a particular philosophy or a theoretical model that has not been looked at, angle that hadn't been looked at before. but you'll have to have a, not necessarily both, but you'll have to have either a conceptual framework or a theoretical, philosophical model around which to base your research. And that will become a big question later. And that's the first real big hurdle that most of the students that I work with have to deal with, is what is that conceptual framework, or what is that theoretical model around which the research is based. And in the prospectus process or the proposal process, that needs to be as explicit as you can make it. We said it would be a mixed methods research. And so we built that around the mixed message research. In terms of Creswell categorization, sometimes Creswell likes to categorize things, and he likes to categorize mixed methods research in several ways. This one was more a concurrent piece of research, in that we were not a sequential or consecutive or any of that, but a concurrent piece of mixed methods research, in that we were collecting quantitative data at the same time we were collecting qualitative data. And so instead of having one data stream sort of feed the other, we learn something quantitatively, and then so we ask about that qualitative. No, these were kind of going in two different lanes at the same time. We were collecting the quantitative data. We had a lane going that direction. And we were beginning to collect qualitative data. She was beginning to do interviews with the first students that we lost after the first year because they moved in a different direction. And so we had, dual lines of inquiry occurring simultaneously. And we would sit down together every couple, 3 months. Actually, every time we had to do an evaluation, we were doing quarterly evaluations on this project. And I was also the evaluator, as well as ended up being the quantitative researcher. I originally was the evaluator, and then kind of merged into a dual role there. But we would get together and talk about where we were and where we were going. And then at the end, we kind of pursued two different threads in the way that we wrote things. And you will find that there's some, different in language when you read some of this. I mean, the quantitative pieces that I wrote in this article are very clipped and specific, because you write quantitative work in a more technical way, and the qualitative pieces were more descriptive. And to use a common term, they were a more rich description of the experiences that students were having. And so we had those two threads happening all the way through. Any of you considering mixed methods or thinking about mixed methods? Yeah, I assumed you probably were, you wouldn't be here. But it is you make some decisions up front. Like we knew up front this was going to be two streams, concurrent. We knew we couldn't, we really couldn't use the one to inform the other. And although I developed the survey, I took guidance from the other researchers as to, what items need to be in there. In fact, we used a kind of a two-step process. They talked about the ideas that we needed to pick up on and where that came from, and the literature background that each of those items or categories of items came from. And then I would develop the instrument, and then we go back and forth as we tweaked and edited and piloted it and did all those things to make sure that it kind of worked. Now, we didn't develop a instrument that we were expecting that other people might use, so we didn't get into all the factor analysis and all that sort of stuff that you do when you're doing really working with an instrument that's being developed for use broadly. And I'm working on another piece of research with that right now, but not for this type of thing. You can read the participants. There were, 46. We lost some because, if they didn't participate regularly or they didn't answer surveys or stuff like that, we had to kind of make some, drop some people there and make sure they were still following, all the kind of the rules of the road. We had 46, I think we started with. So yeah, 46, 26 of those were identified with learning disabilities and or any condition other than ADHD. And then we had a few that were ADHD, a few that were bipolar, a couple that were bipolar, and some that had a combination of different learning abilities and ADHD, and some other that had conditions or abilities that are disabilities that impacted their cognitive processing, traumatic brain injury. We had 3 or 4 of those, 2, I guess, that had traumatic brain injury. And so we were dealing with, and you got to remember, these are students that had not sought services. And although some of them probably should have, and part of our process, as we dealt with these kids and identified these kids, one of the requirements was that they would be registered with the Office of Disability Services at the university, and would have ongoing services. And so the thing that is often the kicking point for kids with learning disabilities or other types of issues is the testing notion, the assessment notion. Some of these kids could deal with almost everything except the university testing schemes and the university rigor, because university personnel typically don't deal a lot with the authentic assessments and oral assessments and things like that some of these kids need, or allowing kids to take tests in silence or have more area or more time, or all those sorts of things. And so testing was the primary bugaboo for a lot of these kids. And it wasn't necessarily that they couldn't access the material, because you remember, these are kids that had been successful in PK-12, and so they had figured out the workaround for them. But it just didn't translate to the increased academic rigor at the university level, and in particular the assessment and testing part. And so a lot of it had a lot of testing stuff that we're dealing with. You may find that very common. It's highly common at 2-year schools, at community colleges, where we have open admissions. And a lot of students, we don't know the number specifically. It might be as high as 15-20% of students going to community college on open admission might have learning disabilities. And a lot of those may be undiagnosed. But kids learn workarounds. They learn how to get whatever it is they learn they have to do to get by and get their B or their C and kind of get to the next class. and without worrying about comprehension. Any thoughts, or is that common to your experience at the higher ed level, at the university level? Have you seen that? Have you seen, or have you, is it something that has been identified as issues that you might need to think about? Because there is a big disconnect between number of kids that typically have learning disabilities, most of which you do not grow out of, but you learn the strategy to be successful, and the number that are actually identified in higher ed settings. And there's a big gap there, which basically in this project led us to believe at the get-go that there were a lot of undiagnosed students at the post-secondary level that really could benefit from diagnosis and learning specific strategies that they could deal with. And so to collect data, we had basically four things. First, we had an informal learning needs questionnaire. And that was the survey that we had developed, the questionnaire we developed. We had strategic instructor and participant evaluation forms. And so the instructor, the mentor, so to speak, or the tutor, would do an evaluation form on the progress of the student, and the student would do an evaluation form on the how successful working with the tutor or mentor was. And we had a strategic instruction session logs, and we had the logs of who was there and what was taught and what was worked with. And then we had all the university information. We had the GPAs, GPA at the beginning of the semester, GPA at the end of the semester, GPA during the semester. We had all that stuff available to identify, how they were transversing some of this. And so there's a little bit of discussion here of each one of those surveys. Obviously in the report that the feds got, there was a whole lot more discussion of each of those surveys. I mean, this is a 20-page article, 16-page article. And in the report to the feds was 180 pages, something like that, final report. So, a lot more detailed information available. And there's a description of the procedures we went through, how the project was run. It's interesting, this was originally located at a different place. This was kind of up there right at the beginning of, before the instruments and all that sort of stuff. It was up here at the beginning of the methodology piece. We had the procedures piece, but the editors believed that it would be better placed where it was, that they wanted to jump right into methodology, because the methodology was a key thing they were focusing on. Does this strategy work at the post-secondary level? And so there's a big discussion of procedures back here, and how we collected the data and how we ran sessions and all that sort of stuff. And a lot of that is some of the language in there, a lot of it's proprietary to special ed folks. So some of that was, okay, I don't need to read all this sort of thing. The quantitative, we had 46 participants, 32 received interventions for one semester, 14 received interventions for 2 semesters, because approximately a third of the recipients received a second semester of interventions, the primary data analysis reflects only the point at which the performance of all 46 could be compared. And so we looked at them 46 in a semester that they were all in the program. And we made a big point of letting people know that it was important to note that quantitative analysis speaks onto the overall performance of the group and not individual participants. We wanted people to be clear that we were not saying how individuals would perform, we're saying how the overall group performed. And that's always what you do with quantitative analysis. You're only always talking about the group. You're never talking about individuals. T-tests were used. We did find that there was improvement in terms of GPA from beginning to end of the semester, if I remember, and from pre-rent or subsequent semesters compared to semester previous or semester following. And so we did find that that these things were effective in general. We found the effect sizes of these were fairly large. Here's that little Cohen's D thing that is an effect size measure for t-test, and we, generally speaking, anything above a 0.05 here is also a medium to large effect. Anything above a 0.08 Cohen's D, or anything above a 0.8 is considered to be a significantly large effect, and the Cohen's D value here was 1.01. So we felt like we had the strategies were effective, and we could make the case for that, although it was a small N, still just 46. That's all we're dealing with altogether, and so it was a small N. We also wanted to know whether students use these strategies independent of working with the mentor or the tutor. In other words, did they incorporate these strategies into their, their learning process? And what we found was that in general, when we looked at whether GPA gains were a function of independent use of strategies, we ended up with t-values that were significant. One was, and for those that were not using their strategies independent, their overall GPA and semester GPA differences were not significant. So we found that students that use their GPA, use these strategies outside of the one class the tutor was working with them in, their GPA gains were more significant than students that didn't use it. Now, is there anything in that table that kind of jumps out at you? Look at their overall GPAs prior to being in the intervention. What we discerned is that, college kids have a certain bravado to them, and or as we used to talk about it, college kids tend to be a little bit of a smart ass. And ones that were pretty good at doing what they had been doing forever as their workaround had a passable GPA, 2.15. That's not going to get you a big job at a Fortune 500, but it'll get you a degree. Whereas students that were perhaps not as comfortable in their workarounds had a lower GPA prior to coming into the program. And then they were the ones that were more likely to have better success because they're more likely to use the strategies in other classes and not just the one class they're working in with a tutor. So we thought that was interesting. We didn't necessarily make a huge deal out of it because we didn't really have the data to say that was necessarily a thing. But we did, kind of allude to it a little bit here and there, but we didn't get into that. But I think that's a big thing. I think the, kids that were felt, better at what they were doing when they got there were perhaps, a little bit more less likely to think that they could be helped by these strategies. Maybe, I don't know. So that was an interesting one that came out of it. Academic standing. We looked at students in good standing versus students on probation. There are two groups here, subjects in good standing and subjects on probation. And we looked at that in terms of whether there's a significant difference there. Students that were in good standing, no, not really. They did not have significant change from their GPA prior to the getting in and their GPA in the first semester and their overall GPA after the first semester. These are not significant outcomes. The students on probation, we found that they had significant outcomes in both scenarios. They had a bigger GPA during the semester than they had coming in. And they had an overall GPA that was significantly better on the going out. And so the kids on GPA, kids on probation tended to do better with it. So once again, that kind of reinforced this idea that kids that had a useful workaround and were comfortable with it did not necessarily see much value in this. No. Another thing you noticed in here, overall GPA after the first semester, 1.78. So these kids are still in trouble. They're still on probation, but they were in deep probation. They were in super secret probation coming in. They were the 1.5s. And the ones on good standing, they were those kids that all the testing said they should be A and B students, and they were making, C's and low B's. Now, qualitative analysis was primarily based on interviews and a review of open-ended responses on some of the evaluation form stuff. We had a case summary worked up on each of these 46 students. And so the qualitative researcher, she looked at all 46 of these case summaries, and she picked 6 randomly. Summaries of 6 case studies are presented. And so she did a case study on 6 people and released some outcomes and comments and things like that. And then these were also informed by some interviews that she conducted, kind of randomly with different students, a little bit of kind of non-focused sort of interviews. But really the primary data collection there was the case study methodology piece, along with interviews incorporated into those. And then we released some outcomes. Identified factors related to improvement and factors related to non-improvement. And talked about the 25 that improved versus the 21 that didn't. And identified questions still to be considered that still need a lot of research. Question 1, to what extent does an informal learning needs assessment as the one used in this project facilitate independent use of learning strategies? Well, we don't know. We observed that some did use strategies in other classes. We observed that some didn't. And typically speaking, the ones that did tended to be more successful than the ones that didn't. But we didn't have enough data really to talk a lot about that. The second question, to what extent does the teaching ability of a strategy instructor lead to the greater success? We found that there were differences between tutors and mentors. We had some that were better than others, some that were more skilled in some of the strategies than others, although we tried to match them up with strategies that they had been observed to have, a good facility in. And so it, sort of as a byproduct of this thing, it helped us to prepare those students a little better, those master's students a little better, because we were able to use this to drive some changes through the curriculum that needed to be there. And how can variables related to non-improvement, like academic deficits, emotional medication issues, be addressed in a productive way so that more students can benefit? And other the big catch-all. We know that these kids have a lot of problems. They have some dependency issues. They have some obvious academic deficits they're trying to deal with. They have depression, they have emotional issues, things like that. And so we were saying this is a big, broad catch-all here in which there would be a lot of work to do. And then limitations in future research. So what were your thoughts about the article itself? And do you see how the quantitative elements were incorporated into the article to sort of get at some of the insight that we're trying to draw? Yeah, I can't.
Dr. Bolt, I guess my biggest question is, like, a lot of the statistical stuff that's in the article, like, D value, things like that. I know you've talked to us about all that, but should we be at the point where, I know we shouldn't be as fluent as you are in this particular article, but I guess I'm wondering how much more fluent I should be than I am.
Okay. How should I say this? No, I don't expect you to necessarily be fluent in all this. I do expect that you should be able to look at an article like this and say, okay, well, I understand what they were doing in terms of what this project, what this research was about. I understand the data they collected. I know the methods of data collection. I don't necessarily understand all the rigmarole about particular statistical outcomes and what's reported in the narrative and all that sort of stuff. Maybe I'm a little fuzzy there, or a lot fuzzy there, or it kind of looks like hieroglyphic sort of ideas. But anyhow, no, I don't expect that. I do expect it not to limit the research you want to do and the data you want to collect. Because, you know, the other two researchers in this model were, in this particular research, were primarily qualitative researchers who had, this was their first large scale quantitative piece. And this was a large scale, even though it was only 46 students, this was a large scale article. I mean, this was the primary lead journal in learning disabilities in the early 2000s, and still is to a certain extent. And so this was where everybody went to find out, you know, what's right on the cutting edge. And, you know, this particular article has been cited somewhere around 1,100 times over the past 15 years. So it's been read by, you know, people that are writing articles and textbooks and things like that. And it's kind of a seminal piece that they deal with. Nothing here is nothing more than a t-test. Now, some editors want certain things. This particular editor wanted, I'm leaning forward here because I'm so far back here and it seems like I have 6 pairs of glasses and none of them work anymore. Some people like tables. You know, some journals love tables. They love you to have all your stats in a table and for the, you know, the tables to be as self-explanatory as you can make them and as clear and simple as you can make them. Other journal editors want you to use in-text citation. And so if this were a research report, not a journal article, I would have been doing lots of tables here. And I wouldn't have been doing, you know, stuff like this, you know, where you've got all these parenthetical type approaches. But there is a APA guideline to parenthetical citations of statistical outcomes. And this particular journal liked these parentheticals. And so I think it makes the reading more difficult, but it, you know, that's what they like. They like for people just to not have to refer to tables anymore than they need to. Now, we put in 3 or 4 tables, which we absolutely refuse to take out because they summarize several things in one table. This is actually 2 separate analyses here in this particular table. I didn't like it this way. I would have preferred to have done a straight up ANOVA and accounted for all this in an ANOVA, but they didn't want an ANOVA. They wanted a t-test. And one version of this, we did have ANOVAs, and it made, to me, it made a whole lot more sense. But it, you know, you write what the editor says, you format it the way they want to format it. And so I think this one was a little messy in terms of understanding, simply because of the editorial, you know, rules on this one. And we were limited to exactly 17 pages. We couldn't go beyond 17 pages of text, and, you know, so there were a lots of rules we had to deal with on this one. And so even though this is a seminal argument, I think we left some stuff in the dust in terms of more lit review stuff and things like that would have helped to for people to understand a little bit better. But you know, that's what you see in research articles. You get the editorial slant too. So you do what the editors tell you to do, and that's kind of a given. But back to your original question. No, I don't expect you to be totally fluent in all this, but I do not want it to hamper the area that you want to research in and the questions that you want to ask. Because in your dissertation process, there will likely either be a chair or a methodologist that you'll want to choose that can help you identify the particular strategy you want to use. And if they're like me, they're going to give you every resource they can, and you will become a limited expert on that particular strategy or that particular procedure at the time, because dissertations are one-man bands. And in most research today, like this one, this was a significant piece of research. Well, we had 3 researchers. We all had different, skill sets. And so we needed 3 different skill sets to make it all work, to make the project and the research work. Your dissertation, you got you. And so that's why you will learn a lot of, if you need a statistical component or a statistical piece, you'll learn an awful lot about it. You'll have 1,000 examples and all kinds of things to work with that'll help you get there. But at that point, you'll be more fluent in a particular area, or maybe a couple areas, than you are now. But in this program, unless you have an awful lot more statistics and all you've had is just what's been in your program, then you will not necessarily be fluent in most of this. But if you've had 30 hours of statistics in your doctoral program and advanced statistical analysis, post-doc research at Stanford, and 40 years of experience, you should be reasonably fluent in this stuff. And so that's why I'm kind of fluent in it. But it's just experience and background, and my knowledge base is a little bit different. But it doesn't mean that you should feel limited in any of this. You just need to realize that if you have a question about something, you ask, well, what does it mean when you say this? What does it mean when the article says this? You ask. And, you get an answer. And over time, if you go in this direction much, over time, you will develop a certain level of fluency, and it might be limited to a few areas, but yeah, you'll develop fluency. And I think that's why, we used to say that people that do research in psychology are almost all fluent in ANOVA, because, most doctoral programs in psychology have a, kind of a predisposition to use ANOVAs for everything. And so people in those areas, content areas, tend to be really good at ANOVA and maybe not so good at a few other things. But I just don't want it to limit your research. That's the thing. You research the thing that you're interested in research, that you build the case for, that you have solid research questions for, and then we'll figure out the methodology. We'll figure out what you need and how to get you there. And double check you along the way to make sure you're not straying off the path. Does that answer that question?
Yes, sir. That's very helpful. I was having a hard time seeing how to get to the next step professionally and in this thinking and as a researcher, and also just knowing that I don't need to change courses because I'm not sure about how something works. So that's very helpful.
Yeah. I don't want you to change course. I think the methodology piece is the very last piece of the question set in my mind, always. Other questions or dubious questions or semi-dubious questions or frustrated comments or general negative statements of my overall worth, whatever, you know, feel free. My, on a personal note, my skill set is not well understood by a lot of folks at the app because they have a very substantial qualitative focus. And they're, you know, they have high-powered qualitative researchers. I mean, Alicia Jackson is about as high-powered a qualitative researcher as you're going to encounter anywhere in the world. And I surprise her every now and then by asking her a qualitative question that kind of shocks her that I would know enough to ask that question. But she doesn't ask me many quantitative questions. And we've never researched together. So she doesn't see me as a viable partner in her research. Which if you're going to be one of the top qualitative researchers in the world, I guess that's okay. But she is. She's substantial. So you only have 3 articles to read for next week. And to finish up part 1. Now, a thing about the way that I deal with these things. Part 1, everything until the final draft, which is not due until beginning of May, is a draft. So, you know, don't worry about it being in a finished, you know, condition when you're submitting a part to look at. I mean, yeah, readable, formatted pretty well, double spaced, 12 point, because I got to be able to read the thing. And obviously with 6 pairs of glasses and I can't see the screen, you know, I need all the help I can get in that regard. And then we'll, you know, give you the feedback that I think you need on that one as you process the next piece. And then you'll incorporate the refurbished first piece with a draft second piece. And then I'll do more feedback. And then you'll do refurbish the second time first piece, refurbish second piece, and draft third piece. And so by the time we get to this submission about a month from now, you will have gotten feedback on all 3 pieces, and I will have had a chance to see everything that you are writing at least once, and in the case of the first and second section, 2 and 3 times. So, you know, that's the kind of the process that I use. And the important piece, the only important piece, is timeline. Is to make sure that you get whatever condition it is, wherever you're at, to me, somewhere around the timelines, so that I get a chance to give you the feedback on the next piece.
So when you say somewhere around the timeline, will the 10th be okay compared to the 9th?
Yeah, hang on.
The 9th is a Friday. I want to make sure the 10th is when I know I don't want to turn it in a mess.
I've somehow logged out. Hold on. No, here it is. Okay. What is it? The 9th is Friday. Okay.
Yeah.
In general, when I say the 9th, it means accepted no later than sometime the 11th.
Yeah, you'll have it by Saturday, the 10th.
Yeah, I do Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I work through everything I got in hand. Then I wait for the next piece to come in, the next piece to come in. So, you know, I want to get feedback done by, you know, Sunday.
Okay.
So, but I can't read them all, you know, at the same time. So, you know, Saturday I'll be reading some and marking those up. And so I'll still be reading some into Sunday because I have, what do I have? I have 8 group projects that I have to read tomorrow and Saturday for 2 other classes. So I can't really read these until Saturday. And I'd like to finish them by Sunday.
I like to have my fresh eyes Saturday morning if I
Yeah,
submit.
well, you know, I appreciate honesty, and I'll, you know, that's why I'm totally honest. I always pick Friday or Sunday, one of the two. In this case, I just picked Friday because it, you know, whatever reason. But I have to have them. I'll try to have them all read by Sunday. So, you know, just be aware. Okay. Any other questions? I mean, we're not meeting next week. Read those 3 articles so that we can kind of burn through them a little bit better, and we can kind of deal with fluency. We'll probably deal with see the order. We'll probably deal with this one, identification of institutional genderedness, which comes from the NASP Journal about Women in Higher Education. It's 2015, so it's fairly recent. And I worked some with Stephanie on a project a few years ago on that was a kind of a national thing, and we went back and forth a little bit on some emails and stuff like that. And so I helped her. I talked with her a little bit about survey stuff and all like that. So that's my only connection to this one. I didn't have anything to do with the research or the analysis or the, you know, writing itself. But you know, I thought she sent me a copy to it. So I always thought this one was, you know, it was a way of, she had tried to do more in terms of what I consider to be mixed methods, although she did not necessarily tout as mixed methods, but it looked like mixed methods to me. And but it had a quantitative component to it because she was one of the first research teams to do something about genderedness that had a fairly strong quantitative component to it, which I thought was kind of interesting. And so that's the reason I picked this one, because it does have, you know, a fairly straightforward, but a fairly significant quantitative component to it. But I think it's mixed methods, but she didn't talk about it that way necessarily. I guess it's up to the researchers themselves to identify whether it's mixed methods or not, but not the reader. But this reader thought it was mixed methods. But so we'll deal with that one first. The other one that we will do is this one, which Precious and I wrote a few years back, 9 years ago, 8, 9 years ago. And Precious was trying to get a little bit more research grounding going. And so she asked me if I would work with her on this. And I did, because I had written a piece that I did a presentation at AERA that she liked. And so, you know, I'd done this piece, and she wanted me to co-research this and co-write it. So I did. And it's based around data from the Teacher Working Conditions Survey in North Carolina and questions about leadership in schools in North Carolina. So it's more of a PK-12 research, but it's got some fairly sophisticated ANOVA, and it's got the marginal means. And then, you know, we had to do some data mining and stuff like that, which will give me a chance to talk about that a little bit with you. So that'll be the second one. The last one we probably won't get to until the week after. And that's this one, which is was picked as one of the 10 strongest articles in online learning over the past decade. And so this has got a bunch of folks here at App on it. And all the quantitative stuff is mine. But, you know, it looks at this notion of sense of presence and sense of community in online learning environments. So I tried to pick stuff that I was very, very, very familiar with, but also stuff that had a variety of different analysis in it. This has chi-square. It has some other stuff in it too. And so we'll kind of see how that helps in that regard.
Dr. Bolt, I am not going to be in class on the 21st.
Okay.
Just wanted to let you know I have a job interview, so I can't come because it's at the same
Please
time
take
as
it.
class.
Please do it.
I can't pass it up, so I'm sorry about
Yeah,
that.
please, no, that is not any issue at all. I mean, the recording will be there, and if you want to sit and talk one-on-one, we'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, fine. Family's always first. Getting a new job you want to get is always second. So, you know, it's not a family issue, but the job issue is right up there. So, yeah. Yeah, I'm going to retire in a few years. I need people being productive in this economy, you know. Got to support old folks. So I'm thinking I might retire by 80. I don't know. I'm kind of kicking that around. Fauci has been a strong role model. I'm not Fauci, but man, at 80 years old, that dude can still do whatever, you know, hang with everybody mentally and intellectually. And tends to have a great sense of humor too. So, you know, he's my role model right now, Fauci. Used to be Warren Buffett, but Warren's slowing down a little bit now. And he's only 86, you know. So Fauci's my role model.
Is that an Atlanta Braves shirt?
What's that?
Your shirt, is it an Atlanta?
No.
Oh, no, App. Okay, I couldn't see the whole
It's
A.
a shirt that I'm a veteran, and the HR people like to give us little gifts on Veterans Day. And this was one of the first ones they gave me, was an App State t-shirt.
Okay.
It was too small then, but after I lost 50 pounds, it works. So, yeah. Any questions, any thoughts, do some reading. I'll get you feedback by Sunday on your ideas, and you know, we'll go from there. Have a great rest of the week. Stay safe, you know, and by all means, if we need to talk one-on-one, give me a yell. And I'll see you in 2 weeks, or actually later. Okay. See y'all.
Hey, Dr. Bolt,
Yeah.
how are you?
Good.
Good. I'm working on finishing up part 1. I'm almost done. And it seems, and I don't know if this is okay, but could I also add looking at the value addedness of family and consumer sciences? I know it's probably more of a mixed method, more of qualitative approach too.
Yeah,
but it seems that my writing kind of is going in that direction as I explain things.
Yeah, we can. In fact, the data can kind of speak to that. Generally, when you talk about value added, you're talking about either a pre-post analysis or multiple, you know, multiple timeline sort of thing. So you have you look from one semester to the next and that semester to the next, and you know, you do it over a period of a couple of 3 semesters and look at some measurable outcome at each one of those semesters. Now you can talk about value added and try to support it with the analysis,
Okay.
but a pure value added, you probably would want to think, is there some pre-data that I then can compare it to post data?
So maybe value added is not really the right term,
Yeah.
because really what as I have begun writing this, as far as the introduction and explaining family consumer sciences and the current really dilemma they're finding themselves in, it's more of explaining, you know, are we looking at this from, you know, are we having less people sign up for these classes? Are we having more people sign up for these classes? What are the type of people that are being either put in these classes, which is apparently something that's happening quite a bit. It becomes the dumping ground
Yeah.
for behavior management issues or lower academic performance students. So
Well, it's kind of the intersection of it's kind of the intersection of the trend in enrollment with the trends in student characteristics.
right.
And that may be, I don't know, we have to see if the data, if you have data that will fit that sort of notion.
I do.
Yeah, but that's a very much a kind of an intersection of 2 areas. And when you're talking about an intersection of area, if it's quantitative data, if it's continuous data, you do correlations or regressions or whatever. If it's categorical data, you kind of do the chi-square thing. And so if the data, if you can get the same data points semester to semester in terms of enrollment numbers, or increase in enrollment from, you know, school to school or, you know, whatever, department to department, whatever, then you can and then also get information on the demographic of the students that are enrolling in the program. Then we can look at relationship between the demographics and the trends in enrollment.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a very doable thing.
Yeah, it just kind of seems the way it's evolving as I write and kind of hammer out the problem statement
Yeah.
and the literature I've been kind of finding. All right, great. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, if you have any other questions or anything, just give me a yell.
All right, will do.
I'm sure I'll be glad to stop reading for a few months.
Well, my goal is to have this in by Friday, so
Okay.
that's my goal. We're gonna keep chugging forward, keep it moving. So have a great night, and I
All
hope
right,
you have a
you do the
lovely
same.
anniversary.
Okay.
All
I'm
right.
looking forward to it. Have a
I
good
would
one.
too.
Bye.
Bye.